ঠিক আছে. Hello friends, once again my hearty thanks to Shyamala and Kahani Tagbak for giving me this chance of speaking to you again. Today I shall speak about the second phase of my journey as a writer and the people who taught me, the people who influenced me, and the people who helped me move on. I had been speaking about AWIC, of which was started by Mr. Shankar, and how many of us became members very enthusiastically and were writing stories for it of different genres. I think as we read each other's stories, at least so far as I'm concerned, I learned a lot from my fellow writers, both about myself, what I was capable of, and what I was unable to do, which I thought I would not be a success doing. So, as I said, while I loved reading Nilima Sinha's Chandipur Jewels and Arup Datta's Kaziranga Trail and Subhadra Sengupta's The Sword of Dara Shikoh, all of which were brilliant stories, I also knew that it was a genre with which I would not feel very comfortable writing. And I decided that I would steer clear of them. Now, so far as stories are concerned, I can say that a lot of my fellow writers wrote such beautiful stories that they made me think and wonder, what is it that I like so much about this story? Why does it touch my heart? Also, I'll mention some of them. So far as humor is concerned, I loved Poili Sengupta's perky stories very much. To this day, they continue to remain my top favorites. Then Sigrun Srivastav's Natarajan stories, which were also hilarious, and Ira Saksena's Mamaji stories, which really were rib-tickling. And while I laughed at the stories and thought how nice it would be if I too could write something which would make people laugh and remember it just as I have remembered these people, there were also stories which touched me very much and made me think. One was Deepa Agarwal's Paruli. That was such a sensitive and well written story. Another one was Girija Ashtana's Grandma's Birthday. That was another story that brought a lump to my throat. And then there was Paro's Bhablu, Paro Anand's story called Bhablu, which I simply loved because it was so simple, such a simple story, and yet it was so moving, so touching, so delightful. I still think of it. I must have read it years and years ago, but I think it is one of the best stories I've ever read. And of course, there are many more whose names I do not have the time to mention just now, but I'd like to say that from my writer friends, I have also learned a great deal. Now, picture books, I have not written very many, but I think I learnt how to go about writing one from Mala Dayal, who was the editor of National Book Trust. I wrote The Sun Fairies, which she liked very much and which she helped me shape, and which has gone into several editions. And even later on, when I wrote other stories such as Tiltil's Adventure or A Trip to the Mountainside, I think they have been popular because there have been several reprints, and also because I enjoyed writing them so much. Now, the next very major influence in my life as a writer has been that of Rosalind Wilson of Target. She played a very, very major role in honing my talent as a writer, helping me learn how to polish a story to the best of my ability. Rosalind did not much care about retolls. She always wanted original stories. And she would read the story very, very carefully, putting down queries where she felt that, something more was needed. Either I had not explained it properly, or something was needed to make the reader understand the story better. She told me that you are the writer, so you may not realize that just reading this, how it strikes a reader. You know why so and so says this, but the reader won't know. You'll need to spell it out. She would not change a single word herself, but she would make me do it. So please think of these points, rewrite these bits, and bring it again. And when I did, I always found that it made so much difference to the story. It read so much better, it was so much more logical, and really it was sometimes a different thing altogether, just because I had added a few touches. Mrs. Vijaya Ghosh, who used to be her second in command in those days, was another fantastic editor. She would take up a piece of writing, whatever it is, a story or a report or an interview, whatever it is, just change a word here, add a word there, shorten something, delete something, and it became a different thing altogether. It was wonderful. She had a magic touch. After she transformed it, it really read like something else altogether. Later, she was to be my editor in Limca Book of Records, but I'll come to that later. Now, apart from learning from Rosalind, I think I learned a great deal when I joined Target as part of her editorial team. Because I was a part-timer, myself, and there was, in fact, two of us joined on the same day, myself and another writer called Akshay Singh. The first thing Rosalind asked us was, "Can you type?" So both of us shook our heads, no. Well, that's something every writer should know and you'll need to learn. Immediately, she gave us two typewriters and said, "You start from today. Every day before you do anything, you must practice for an hour or 2 hours, I don't mind how long. But mind you, at the end of a week, I don't want a single handwritten submission. Everything has to be typed out. I don't care how long you take to type it. I don't care if there are a few mistakes at first, but you have got to do it." So Akshay and I, both of us, we took the typewriter and started practicing in earnest, because we knew that Rosalind meant what she said. In those days, the main computer was with India Today office upstairs, and we had a monitor in the office which was looked after by Anita, who was Rosalind's PA. And as and when Rosalind dictated stories to her, gave them to her, she keyed them into the computer. But none of us dared to touch it, because some of the writers like Vijay and Vatsala, they did. But I know the new ones at least didn't dare to touch it for fear something might go wrong. Now, after learning typewriting, the first thing which I learned after joining Target was how to write a story in the comic format. Now, Target, the magazine, had the last page called Granny's Gupshup, which normally was a folk tale told in just one page in the comic format. Now that means in 9 or 10 frames maximum and blurbs, you have to tell the whole story. Which, of course, I thought it would be very, very difficult. But then But then I knew I had to learn it, and I gradually grew interested. I wondered how I could possibly fit in a story into just those few balloons and how could I tell the story. But then when you are interested, everything is possible. I soon learned how to do it. Now, after I succeeded in fitting the story inside 10 frames, came the next stage. Now, Rosalind said, now you must write down full directions for the illustrator. The illustrator is not going to do anything himself except draw. So, if it is a Rajasthani folk tale, you have to give him photocopies of Rajasthani clothes which the characters will wear. Men's, if there's a woman, then women's clothes also. You must give him the background of the scenery, some scenes from Rajasthan which would make it seem like there wouldn't be much scope, but then even then, whatever is there should be correct. So you should give some photocopies of the scene of the place. Then you should write down in each frame along with the blurb from what angle the artist is going to draw it. Is it going to be a long shot, a mid shot, or a close up? Now, a story told in 9 frames should have a couple of close ups and the rest. I didn't know these terms or what they meant, but Rosalind explained them to me very patiently and said that, see, this is how. So that when the artist gets these directions, very easily he can draw it. And Rosalind was a great perfectionist. She wanted everything perfect. I mean, you couldn't have a story from Rajasthan, somebody wearing clothes which they would wear in Bengal. She wanted it to be correct in every single minute detail. Now, we also had another feature called folk tale or fairy tales. This was also in comic format, but this was in 2 pages instead of 1. And this we carried, I think, every 3 months or every 4 months. It was not regular. But here also. So I remember one instance when I was doing an Austrian folk tale, which I loved very much. Then Rosalind read the story and passed it and said, now what about clothes and the scenery? I said, it should be, normal European clothes. And she said, no, it's an Austrian tale, so it has to be correct. I said, but you go and see in the library what there is. Now, we had a beautiful library. That was a common library. It belonged to India Today, but we were also allowed to use it. So I went there, and unfortunately, I found nothing about Austria. Then Rosalind said, the only thing you can do is you take an appointment, go to the Austrian embassy and ask them to give you some magazines or some things which will show it. I'd never been to the embassy before, and anyway, the appointment was made for me, and I went there wondering what the person in charge was going to think. So I went there, and the person who met me was quite intrigued and said, yes, what can I do for you? I said, see, I've come from Target, the magazine, and we are illustrating an Austrian folk tale. May I have some pictures, please, to illustrate of the background? He said, okay. Here is the full shelf. You choose yourself. All these magazines are there. So I picked up one book. Not a book, it was more like a magazine, a journal kind of thing, which had a lot of scenery, scenes and things, and as well as people wearing the typical costumes and all that. I think Tyrol or some such place. I think Tyrol or Vienna or in early times. So he said, okay, you're welcome, you can take that. We have copies. So I took it back, brought it back, and made photocopies and gave it to the artist. So she was that particular about details. And while in Target, and yes, 2 things. My getting so involved in the comic format had two direct results. One was that in my own stories, I put in many more conversations, dialogues and conversations, because in the blurbs it was totally made of dialogues. So that was an indirect influence. I found that I was using many more dialogues. Also, this was one. Secondly, I got to know the artists who were doing it. It was very nice. So, mostly the people who helped me with the gupshup were Nilab and Joyanto and Subha Ghosh, Suresh Kumar, Priya Natarajan and Vandana Visht. There were some others also, but these are the main. And of course, there were some artists whom I never met because they came at a time when I was not in the office. But it was nice meeting the artists and working together and discussing how the frames should look. It was really good. Shuddho, of course, was there. Shuddho Shatto Boshu. He was there. He illustrated most of the stories, but he would not. Nobody asked him to illustrate the comics as well. But he had too many other important things to do. And then another thing which I learned was during this period I learned to interview people, to write profiles, to prepare science notes, to collect quotes, to make interesting fillers, and write stories and features as and when needed. Every month Rosalind would select a theme and all of us contributed by writing a feature or some kind of a write-up. So it went on. Once I remember Rosalind had a project called The Most Interesting Birthday I Have Had. And she asked us to go and meet a lot of celebrities and ask them. So many people were so busy that, they just spoke about it on the phone, which we took down. But many others didn't mind going and meeting them. So that is when I went to meet, I remember, one was Mr. Amjad Ali Khan, and Sharmila Tagore, and Leela Seth, Siddharth Basu, Barry John, these people. It was a great experience, meeting them, speaking to them, and getting the quotes. And what was nicest was this, that they didn't mind I had come from a children's magazine. They didn't mind that I had come to collect only a quote, not a proper interview. Quote along with quotes from 30 other people. They didn't mind at all. They were very, very sporting and were very nice. So, meeting people, I loved it, but I didn't know then that it was having a great impact on broadening my vision and my all-round development. Target is also the place where I did my first ever translation. Rosalind wanted to carry a feature of famous writers in India, and from Bengal she wanted a story by Leela Majumdar and Sunil Gangopadhyay. So, and Leela Majumdar was very formidable in those days, being considered the queen of fiction in children's literature in Bengali. And moreover, she was a double first class in English. So she immediately said, you send me the translation first. I'll see if it is up to the mark and then pass it. Sunil Gangopadhyay, of course, was already familiar with my writing. So he said, yes, she can do it. So these are the two stories which Rosalind carried. And Leela Majumdar was quite happy with my translation, I'm glad to say. So these are the two stories that were carried in Target. Both were illustrated beautifully by Shuddho Shatto Basu, who was brilliant. And I've put up some in my blog, you could see them. And that's how I was perfectly happy and would have continued, but after 2 years, my husband got transferred out of Delhi. And when I came back after a few years, things were very changed. And I joined then Eve's Weekly, where Jaya Ramanathan was the editor. Jaya Ramanathan, it was a very small group, and Jaya was a dynamic editor with a lot of very bright ideas, and she was the most inspiring. She refused to believe that everybody couldn't do everything. She said, why not? So I remember, apart from writing stories and apart from, uh, you know, polishing up those that had come in and doing the usual features, she once asked me, Swapna, you go and do this. You go to the Lalit Kala Academy, some art exhibition is going on. You go there, find out, and write a report. So I was frankly very scared. I said, Jaya, I don't know the first thing about art. She said, am I asking you to evaluate the artist or the pictures? No, it's a simple report. You read up about the artist, where he's from, what school he belongs to, and what are the paintings on display. And if the artist is there, you ask a few questions and put that down, how long the exhibition is going to be. So what's the problem? Why can't you do this much? I said, okay. Luckily that day, when I went, I think it was an exhibition of Ravi Verma, whose work I had not really seen before. And I was so impressed. I loved it so much. So I came back, and not only I did a report, but after that, when I went to Baroda, or when I went to Trivandrum, the first place I rushed was to see a Ravi Verma museum, to see the paintings, because I liked them so much. So another time Jaya wanted to do a feature on, my kind of man. That was supposed to be a humorous piece, and she wanted a lot of celebrities. So in my turn, I had to visit Sonal Mansingh, Sharan Rani, Anurag Mathur, Mrinal Pandey, and some such people. And when I went and said that, this is what I've not come to discuss art with you. This is what my editor wants me to do, because she's bringing out this feature. And Sunal Mansingh, and they were such sports. She laughed and laughed and laughed and said, okay, very well. I'll tell you what I think about my kind of man. So everybody was very different. And Anurag, of course, spoke about, he was newly married in those days. So he spoke about my kind of woman. So it was a very, very interesting and very humorous feature which she carried on. And everything she did, it was very original, very nice. So I was with her for a whole year, after which I think Eves didn't carry on much longer. And the next place I joined was Limca Book of Records, where my old friend Mrs. Vijaya Ghosh was the editor. Now, it was sheer delight working under her and working with her, because she was such a fantastic person to work with. So unselfish and so understanding and so very helpful and ready to guide you in whatever way you wanted. So she knew what I was interested in and asked me to do the chapter on art, culture, architecture, and some others. And it involved a lot of reading, so she sent me to the libraries to do the reading. And it also involved, finding new records as well as updating the old ones. Once again, updating records meant quite a few times travel, and I had to go to, among the places I went to, one was Kalakshetra, which was wonderful, and another was the artists' village in Cholamandalam. And since we were carrying a major record on A.R. Rahman that year, so I went to meet him also. It was, of course, very, very tough meeting him in those days, because he was just coming up, and it's not that he didn't want to meet people, but people didn't allow the others to get close enough. But anyway, I managed it. Same with Ilaya Raja, because I had to update and record which we were carrying. And when I went to his house, his son said, "Oh no, Papa doesn't meet anybody, so I'm sorry, I can't help," and all that. So I said, "Where is he?" "No, he's recording." I said, "Okay, I'll go and sit outside the door." He has to come out sometime. He can't live inside the studio. He said, "Yes, but he may take very long coming out." I said, "Never mind. I'm in no hurry." So I sat outside, and as soon as Mr. Ilaiyaraaja opened the door, I rushed in and said, "See, sir, this is why I have come," and all that. And he was also very nice, just as Mr. A.R. Rahman was. And he asked his secretary, "Why were you not allowing this lady to come? She's from the Limca Book of Records." And it was really a memorable evening. And meeting Mr. Ilaiyaraaja was as good. And he not only gave me all the updates, he also gave me his some of his cassettes. In those days, not many people had CDs. So, cassettes were the usual mode by which we listen to music. Mr. A.R. Rahman, his Sapne had just released then. So, he also gave me a cassette of his Sapne, the latest release. And while in Limca, we had an annual award where a lot of celebrities were awarded. That's when we got to meet people like Vishwanath Anand and Laurie Baker and Bachendri Pal, Shabana Azmi, Chitra, and all such people. It was really wonderful. And I usually wrote features about them later. I soon realized that, writing profiles and features and interviews was every bit as interesting as writing a story. And I knew then that I was going to do it always. I wouldn't just stick to stories, I'd also write about real people, real things, real places, because that would also give me a lot of joy. The next great influence in my writing career was Mr. Manoj Das, editor, Heritage. Now, Heritage was a literary magazine brought out by the Chandamama Group. He carried only the very best of literature and some about reports on travel, history, and so on. So he asked me to write some book feature on the Red Fort. I was quite shocked at first. I said, "But Manoj sir, I'm not a student of history." He said, "So what? Haven't you seen it?" I said, "Yes, I have. But I don't know much about history. I only read it in school." He said, "Yes, I'm not asking you to write an article for the students of history. This is not an erudite article. So you are a layman. You ask yourself, what are the things that you would be interested to know about Red Fort? So write it from a layman's point of view. That's exactly what I want. But what you have to do is you have to read up a great deal. You shouldn't say anything which is not accurate, which cannot be checked. So please be very careful. Always give the quotes, always say where you got them from, and so that if anybody wanting to can check out any fact. And then you ask yourself, if somebody was telling you the story of Red Fort, what would you ask for? What would interest you? So I think you are the best, a layman is the best person to judge what another layman is going to like. I said, "Okay." He said, "I'm giving you 6 months for study." In those days, naturally, no computers. So libraries were the only things. But luckily in Delhi, there are many good libraries. And I spent days reading and making notes. And I got so involved. I loved it. I really I feel that spending hours in the library and making notes, that's a pleasure which children of today miss, because it's a great feeling. And anyway, I did what I could. Yes, I must mention, Manoj gave me a list of books I could refer to, because he knew that that would take time. So his brother also, I think, was a professor of history, and Manoj knows a great deal about history himself. So I just had to find out those books, great travelers and historians and Cambridge history and everything. So, whatever I could find, it was enough to write an article. And it did take me all of 6 months, but I loved it. And then he said, you lived in Madhya Pradesh for so long, why don't you write on Mandu? Now, Mandu is a fort which I had really loved and enjoyed, and I had already made a lot of notes about it because while we were in Indore, I was lucky enough to visit the Holkar library once, and he had a lot of rare books on the building of Mandu and all that, and I sat down and made notes. So it wasn't so very difficult to write on Mandu. And then again he said, see, there's this new archaeological find in Sanghol. Why don't you go to the museum and find out about it and do a write up? By then I was greatly interested in both history and archaeology, and I jumped at it. And I went there and spent some time to ask my husband to take some good photos, and I did a piece on Sanghol as well. But so far as writing is concerned, he only carried the classics. So he said that now you can think of some translations. We don't have any good translations of Parashuram, who's such a great writer and such a great humorist in Bengal. So, what about translating some of his stories? So, I had already a little experience from Target, so I said, okay, I did that. And translated others, some others also, Sunil Gangopadhyay and Ashapurna Devi and a few more. And he said, what about poetry? We don't get to see much of Bengali poetry. I said, yes, he said, you do one thing. You choose only those poets who are still around. You write and send your poem to them. And if they approve, then that's fine. You don't need to think of anything else. So I chose people like Premendra Mitra and Shankha Ghosh and Nirendranath Chakraborty, Subhash Mukhopadhyay, some of them, and translated some of their poems and sent it to them. And when they sent back an approval, the Manozda carried many of them. And this experience later gave me the courage to translate 20 contemporary modern Bengali poets into English, for which I got a scholarship from the Ministry of Culture. Those poems, I could not find a publisher for those poems, but I was very happy to do them and I loved the experience. So, this is the second phase of my